Hey, this is Trevor Powers from Youth Lagoon, and this is the LSQ podcast.
I absolutely love the new Youth Lagoon album, Rarely Do I Dream, which is the fifth full length LP by the project helmed by the artist Trevor Powers, who returned to the Youth Lagoon moniker a couple of years ago after taking a break and putting out a couple of albums under his own name. I was fascinated in the conversation ahead in this episode to hear from Trevor about those various decisions, first to set aside the name Youth Lagoon and then to pick it back up. And there were so many things that intrigued me about the stories he shared from earlier in life when he was first connecting with his creativity. And let's get into it. Thank you for pressing play on the LSQ podcast, episode number 121. Oh, and Youth Lagoon is out on tour in North America right now. And you can see the upcoming dates and get tickets at youthlagoontour.com.
Jenny, how are you?
Hi.
How are things?
Things are okay.
Good. Sometimes okay is as good as it gets.
Right, right. How are you?
I'm doing beautiful. It's been a really nice day.
Awesome. What is this room that you're in? Is this your studio? I see sound
Yeah,
proofing.
this is my studio. It's an absolute wreck at the moment. It's I have this weird relationship with chaos where it seems like it's almost like when I'm being productive, there has to be some element of mess, and that connects to ideas. It almost feels like if I clean when I'm working on something, like there's a doorway that I find um as far as ideas go, and then if I clean too soon, then the idea goes away. I know I sound like an absolute maniac.
No, I mean, that
I
makes
think I
sense.
am.
That makes sense. I mean, it's like if things are too, who has time to clean when you're being productive, right?
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. I especially when you get sucked into there's something that's pulling you in. It feels like such a distraction to clean up the magazines or do something. If you could see my floor, you would know what I mean.
What's on the floor?
Oh, well, I'm getting ready for tour, so I do have an excuse. Tour starts end of next week. And so I just have all these cables and gear that I'm sorting through, and I'm trying to figure out what I still have to order in terms of just like, there's always little machines.
How are you feeling about going on tour?
I'm so excited. I'm very excited. I have the best team ever. My band, there's just some of my best buds, and we just have so much fun. That's my whole thing creatively is just surrounding myself with people that I love to be around, because if you have that, you have everything. I mean, everything always snaps into place if you got love.
Who's the band? How many folks are in the band supporting you on this tour?
There's two other guys in the band. There's a dude named Logan he's been a brother of mine since we were in high school. So we've known each other for 20 years. And he's been someone that's just always been, like, if I'm going through a hard time or there's anything on my mind, he's always the first person that I call. And then there's a guy named Sonny who is just the sweetest, most beautiful soul, and he's playing bass and guitar. He's switching between the two, and Logan is switching off between drums and guitar. And then I have like my whole electronic station with, keys and synths, and then I'm playing some guitar too. So we're all moving around. It's like this constant game of chess.
And where do you live now? What this house that you're in relation to where you grew up? I mean, have you always been in a fairly short radius?
Yeah, I've lived in so my where my parents live, that's where I grew up, and they live just 20 minutes up the road. So this neighborhood, I mean, it is a different neighborhood, but this neck of the woods is the same as, not much has changed from when I grew up. That has been so important to me to have that frequency that is very grounding, and it's very rooted in like with me even referencing my buddy Logan, people like that I've, they've been in my life since I was really young. There's so much of this of the music world that's a tornado. It's so chaotic. So having that counterweight is so incredibly important. When I was in high school, I couldn't wait to get out because this had always been home and it felt so boring because it had always been home. But once I had started touring and constantly getting out and coming back home, I realized that it was so vital for me to have this heartbeat that did stay relatively consistent because there was so much in my life that was inconsistent.
We're gonna go into that, the olden times, in a bit, but I want to start by talking some about this awesome new album, Rarely Do I Dream, which, man, what a fucking great album, dude.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so incredibly proud of this one.
It's so good.
Very, very proud of it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And, I love a lot about it, but I certainly do love all the audio from the home videos that's woven throughout the album. Definitely brings even more of a cinematic feel to the whole thing and this sense of story. And I'd love to hear more about just that the influence of that on this album. In particular, the idea that, like, it's not like you went far away from home. You, as you've said, you've stayed close for your adulthood. Nonetheless, you had this experience where you found this trove of these videos that it sounds like it recontextualized sort of your childhood in this way, like you had gone to another planet and come back or something.
Yeah, and that's always the goal is because I'm always trying to make something that feels like my inner world. And if I did that, then I hit the bullseye. I did everything. Because that's all you can really do in any artistic realm is there's no way to make something better or outdo yourself. I don't even know what that means. Like when someone comes out and they're like, this is my best album, or filmmakers like, this is my best movie, that to me is so meaningless because you're either making something effective and telling the truth, or it's something that's ineffective and you're not telling the truth. So my whole thing is how do I get to the core of who am I in this present moment? And working with home video and family archive, that was something that it goes hand in hand with my whole creative process now, where I don't I I'm never really knowing where I'm going until I start walking down the road. And then the road starts showing me where to turn, and I have to be in tune to that. I had found this box of all these old home videotapes and taken them home just purely out of curiosity because I had never seen them. No one in my family had ever watched them. My parents always had the camcorder out, but no one had ever seen these tapes. And I had started these music sketches at the same time as watching the tapes. I have this old CRT TV in my studio, and right away it felt like the audio from the home videos was inseparable from what was happening in the music. So to me, my whole approach with this album is it is using time and childhood memoir as colors on the paintbrush and textures, and really just using it as an instrument. But the songs are there's so many more dimensions to that do feel like they exist outside of time, because the time itself is something that's it's so fabricated. We like to think that it's linear when time is really just a stack of pancakes.
I think there's something so poignant, though. One of the things that stood out to me was just like, even just, well, one thing, this is before I get to the poignant thing, is just interesting how, like, this stuff is just like early 90s. It's not that long ago, but it sounds so vintage. Like, if you didn't know, if somebody listening didn't know, no, these are actual home videos from like Trevor's childhood, and they were just found sounds like a lot of artists use. It could be from like the 50s or something. There's something so
Yeah.
vintage sounding about it, like when you watch old movies and you're like, did people talk different then, or do we
Yeah.
sound dumber now or something? There's just something about it that you're like, how is this only, I know the 90s are like 30 years ago, but, like, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if that struck you as well. It sounds so much more vintage or out of time than even it is.
Yeah, no, I was struck by that too, because a lot of it, and this is also living in Idaho, there is something about that, with me referencing how there's a lot of Idaho that has stayed the same, and then there's certain bits of, more of like metropolitan Boise that has changed a lot, and there's better coffee shops and more shit to do and better dive bars and whatnot. But on the outskirts of town, there is this outside of time feeling to it. And with that being said, that even goes hand in hand with the way that people talk and the way that people conduct their lives, or the rhythm of speech too. My dad, for instance, my dad is such a specific way of talking, and the way that his words, just the way his mind works first and foremost. But then the way he puts words together, it that does feel like it's almost coming from some other dimension. And I have an uncle that was like that too, that shows up on the tapes where, like you said, it's happening in the 90s. Like some of this stuff, it might be 1993, but the way that the vocal rhythms sound, or the timbre sounds, it does feel, it could be 1963.
Totally. But also the poignant thing that I was going to say is just like the inflection in your father's voice, or I don't know if maybe in some cases it's your uncle, but when they say your name, which like for listeners, like you hear Trevor's name come up a lot in these audio sections, which is where you're just like, oh, this is legit. Like this is definitely actually like your full name at one point. It's like your full first, middle, and last name gets said. But there's just like so many times it's like Trevi. It's like said with so much love, like from a parent to a
Yeah,
child, that it's like, oh, it's a beautiful
yeah,
thing.
I know. And that was the most emotional thing about working with the audio in that kind of context, and using it in this way that was so there. It felt like there was such a responsibility that I had on my shoulders of how I wielded the power of that history. And I think that responsibility made made my clarity and and direction just that much more. There was just more weight to it right out of the gate, because I knew I didn't want to fuck it up. There's too much on the line to fuck it up. But also I didn't want to overthink it, because like I said, there's so much of my process that comes back to with ideas bubbling up, and instinct has to take over, because your subconscious knows where to take something and what it's supposed to be. And the more that you consciously guide it, the more it can end up turning into this thing that feels forced, or you could be too concerned with perception, or how an idea might be heard. Previous versions of myself got so wrapped up in that headspace where I was getting so far ahead of myself and thinking about how people would hear something, or the lens that they would see it through, versus just being in that pure state of childlike creativity. And the more that I've embraced stillness in my life and gotten away from distractions, and known when to put down screens and fucking turn off the internet, the more that I've been able to access that place of really having this it feels like some kind of creature that starts that starts forming in my studio whenever I have an idea, and I'm a servant to that creature. I'm a servant to what that creature wants to be.
Speaking of previous versions of yourself, let's talk about the earliest version of Trevor as a creative person. What do you remember about as a kid, the earliest inklings of creativity you had, or of doing creative things being like fun for you?
It was always my everything, because I felt like it was the one place that I belonged. Was this it was that reality, or alternate reality, of what was happening in my mind. And there was so much that I always felt like I wanted to say, that I didn't know how to say. And that's why I got into drawing as a kid. When I was really young, I would always just draw these super wild pictures. things that just felt, looking back on them now, it felt so psychedelic, but I think a lot of childlike art is like that, where, that comes back to creating from the subconscious, where you have these things and you're just letting it come out and letting it be whatever it wants to be. And then that turned into music when I was 6. I started taking piano lessons when I was 6. And I came from, my family didn't have any money. I mean, we always had enough to get by, but we lived on chili dogs and Doritos, and it was always enough. We had, I wouldn't have it any other way. There was so much love in the house. But it was a big sacrifice that my parents made to be able to figure out how to wrangle enough money to put me in piano lessons. So I took piano lessons from 6 to 12, and then when I turned 13, I didn't want to be the kid playing piano because all my friends were playing guitar. So I switched to guitar and forgot everything I learned. I forgot all the theory for 6 or 7 years. So when I came back to piano, I had this foundation of guitar at that point, and combining with piano. And I was grateful that I did forget so much of the theory, because when I started writing my own music, it made it to where I didn't really want to know. I didn't want to make sense of it. I wanted it to be this world of madness.
Back in the phase when you were just learning piano and then learning guitar, what was the shit that you were listening to that you were into? Who were your favorite bands and artists then?
Well, I grew up in a really religious home, so when I was really young, so much of that was controlled with what I could or couldn't listen to. So it was a lot of either Christian or gospel music, or it was oldies like the Carpenters or songwriters like John Denver. So I grew up homeschooled. So I was homeschooled all the way up until high school. And I think that really pushed that imaginative state even further, because I didn't have much going on outside of my immediate household. It was me and my family and the Beach Boys and Elvis. I loved Elvis. But I thought all of it, I thought all that was current. I didn't know, because I wasn't exposed to other things. So when I was listening to Elvis, I mean, for all I knew, it came out the day before.
It's funny that by the time you were a kid, Elvis was like considered wholesome.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's
So
so funny.
it was you and your brother, or are there other siblings, or you were homeschooled sort of together?
Yeah, it was all together. I have 3 brothers, so me and my 3 brothers, and then my mom and my dad. My mom she homeschooled us, and so she was home all day with us, and then my dad would go off to work. But yeah, we just had it was such a beautiful household. But also there was, like with any family, we had all these issues and family members who struggle with addiction, and just there's all those different sides to the coin. And that's one thing too that it can be really dangerous when people start feeling nostalgic for something, or you're playing with time. It's so easy to fall into that trap of having everything be this nicely organized or easily digestible thing. But what made working on this album all the more difficult, but also it was a fun challenge, is how do I also, within the realm of, combining autobiography and fantasy, how do I get into those more of those dark details of what it means to be human, and the immense battles that happen on a daily basis.
You definitely got the dark details in there. There's
Yeah, yeah.
no mistaking that. So wait, so when you were like piano's kind of boring and everyone wants to play guitar, like what because you were homeschooled, so you weren't, it's not like you were at school and other kids at school were like guitar is cooler, dude. Like where did that come, where did that idea come from?
Well, I played baseball. I played Little League baseball. So I that was my one outlet. It wasn't that, it was obviously my brothers and I, and that was our immediate world, but there was a local Little League team, And when I started playing Little League, that's what really made me feel like a weirdo because I would see all these kids that they knew about all the shit going on in the greater outside world, and I had no idea. There would be jokes I they would completely go over my head. But it was being exposed to that, I think was very healthy because I had just enough of that to where I always was a weirdo, but it had, it made me ask some questions of, oh, what is the world like?
So when you first started playing guitar, what kind of songs were you playing?
It was a lot of, my uncle referred to it as speed rock because it was a lot of power chords and really simple, rudimentary ideas. But my whole basis was I loved distortion and I loved textures ever since I was a kid, running things through old amps or anything that I could make it feel like a sound that you could reach out and touch.
And so when you started, what inspired you to start writing songs, and what did those sound like initially?
I don't really remember what the first song was that I wrote and why I wrote it, but I knew there was something that was always knocking on my door that was telling me that's what I had to give my life to, because something in music made sense in a way that nothing else did. And again, with the communication side of music, there was always a way that music could speak to me. And when I was writing music, things that I could say through music that I felt completely incapable of saying any other way. I was really shy as a kid, and I had a lot on my mind that I didn't know how to get out. And music felt like one of those cheat codes of I didn't even have to, even before I started working on lyrics, I could just have a musical idea, and I felt like what I could say through one song was a lifetime worth of what was in my brain that I couldn't say any other way.
Once you, as you said earlier, you went to high school outside of the home. Did you start to hear and get into more pop culture stuff and whatever music was sort of floating around in your peer group at the time?
For sure, for sure. Yeah, and I jumped into it really quick. So as soon as I went into high school, that's when the floodgates opened, and it was listening to everything from Corn to The Offspring to Blink 182. That whole realm is like very, very Warped Tour. And then as I started getting a little bit older, that's when I started finding out all these new, like, friends would introduce me to Cocteau Twins. I had an uncle of mine who died from an overdose when it was in 2007, so I was a senior in high school. My uncle was the one that got me into My Bloody Valentine, Oingo Boingo. Yeah, just so much. There was so many. I felt like every single day there was something coming in that was revolutionary and so formative. And I've never lost that feeling. I think that's what makes music and any kind of creative wormhole so exciting to this day is every single morning when if I'm reading a book or watching a movie or stumble onto some new song online, there's always something that's coming in that's changing my not only thought process, but there's something internally that's awakening my spirit in these new ways and pushing me in all these different directions that I just can't. There could be an endless amount of lifetimes, and I can't get it all out what's up here.
And when did you start, like, really getting into recording your songs, and presumably what would have been like the lead up to Youth Lagoon being a project? How did that all get going?
I had started writing the first Youth Lagoon album, The Year of Hibernation, when I was going to Boise State, and I had this chunk of songs that I knew that there was something there. And at the same time, I had this swirling, overwhelming anxiety that controlled every waking hour of every day. And music felt like, much like how it always has, it was the savior, where when I got into these really dark places mentally, music was this place that I could go to get the devil off my back and find a way to keep going. And with the year of hibernation, when I was going to Boise State, I was studying. I had changed my major multiple times. I was basically in school because I had no idea what I was going to do if it wasn't for if music didn't work out. And at that point, I had done multiple tours regionally at coffee shops, playing in front of mostly just baristas and maybe one or two other people. And the Year of Hibernation felt like my Hail Mary. It felt like my, not that I would have given up after that, but it did feel like what was happening in my mind was so dark and such a cloud that everything felt so black. And starting Youth Lagoon and having these songs that I was working on when I was in between classes, it was almost like if that didn't work, I don't know if I to be honest, I don't know if I would have kept living, because my anxiety and my mental state was so heavy is an understatement. It was it was a very scary time.
So once the project started to do well, and obviously this was in an era when the blogs, places like Pitchfork and stuff, were super powerful, and it's like having support from these indie music publications really could get your music out to a huge audience. I mean, it's a lot of people I feel like to hate on that kind of era in a way, but it's I would go back in a heartbeat to that, as opposed to sort of the Spotify playlist era where it feels like there's everything's become more generic somehow. The fact that like back then truly weird shit could somehow be everywhere all of a sudden because
Yeah.
these tastemaker publications heard it and got it and knew that there was a value in amplifying something niche.
Yeah, totally. And now so much of it feels cold and detached, and people doing it for the wrong, I don't want to say the wrong reasons, because only people inside their spirit know why they're doing it, but it does seem like a lot of people, there's such a push, especially with social media, TikTok and Instagram, all of it, to have it be, look at me, I'm important, right? It's no different than a little kid wanting their aunt or uncle or parent to watch them go down the slide. It's the validation of existence. You're basically saying I exist, right? And I think that's why so many people now are so consumed within internet culture, social media, to have it be this thing of uh, we all want to know that we exist for a reason. But if you're creating from that space of purely validation for existence, you're generally not gonna get into this zone of that true discovery, that's something that really is moving the needle of the soul. And that's what I'm consumed with, is how do I get to that place where it's like how I listen to music, and how all of that becomes such a piece of me, a part of me, falling in love with records, or falling in love with movies or books. And that's how I'm approaching every single song I write, every single album I work on, as this something that has immense preciousness. I mean, I'm so against that whole idea of not being precious with ideas. Why the fuck not? I mean, it's uh it's who you are. Why not be precious with who you are?
And is some of that what you're talking about with like worrying about or thinking about when you're doing something for validation versus in like the purity of a creative feeling? like why you decided to put Youth Lagoon away for a while back in about 2016?
Yeah, I had killed it off in 2016 and I had no intention of bringing it back because I had lost clarity of who I was as a person. I had no direction. I had that cloud of anxiety and depression had come back full force, and it was never. Youth Lagoon has carried such a it's been such a light in my life that it felt so inappropriate to continue it back then. And so that's why I had killed it off, is because I was like, I'm not going to have this thing that has always been this pure thing get pulled into this spiral of who I was as a person. And so I had put it aside and kept working on music and made two albums I'm incredibly proud of. There's an album called Mulberry Violence, which came out in 2018 under my own name, and then another album under my own name called Capricorn in 2020. Both of those I can look at as these college, essentially college courses in production and songwriting, and I got to explore all these parts of my brain without the attention and total lack of awareness, because so many people don't even know those albums exist. And so I was able to just get lost into these caverns. And what had happened after I had done Capricorn, I had some massive health issues hit and complete destruction of self, and every fear that I had, especially in relation to health, started coming true. And it was ironically in that total collapse that I started to be able to see beauty for really the first time in my life. I could feel beauty. I could walk out and feel the wind on my skin and pay attention to how the trees and flowers move, and really, if I was eating soup, I could really taste the soup. It's weird how life does that thing where sometimes what you consider the worst thing imaginable to happen is the greatest gift you've ever been given.
And so that's sort of inspired you to bring Youth Lagoon back, or like not deprive yourself of it.
Yeah, it was such a natural thing because when I got into this conversation with a friend, I had gone to see a buddy that lives in Kansas City, and it was when all of my health started unraveling, and all of these things on the outside, it would have been, so anyone looking at my life, they would have thought that it was horrifying, and it was for a while. It was for quite a while, a handful of months. I didn't even know if I would live through it. But what had started happening was it woke me up in this way that I felt like everything up until that point I was numb, and then suddenly I was aware. And I was having this conversation with a buddy in Kansas City, and we were talking about Youth Lagoon because I had mentioned a couple songs I was working on, and it was in that whole collapse of self and health and identity and all of this stuff came raining down, that it felt like the only appropriate move creatively was to not it wasn't just a resurrection of moniker, but it felt like a resurrection of my soul, and playing with that history of what those two words Youth Lagoon have always meant to me, and being able to honor that and take it into the pull it into the present moment and into the future. It all made sense, and it all was so clear. And now it feels like a brand new project. I mean, it really is a brand new project where I'm playing with this history and being able to, like I said, honor it, but also flip it on its head and stretch it and warp it. But with who I am now, I'm so unrecognizable from who I used to be in every way, that approaching the moniker from that dimension, it is, for all intents and purposes, a brand new baby.
I remember last time we spoke was around Savage Hills Ballroom. and you were talking at that time about running. I
Uh,
remember you were talking about how sometimes, I want to say it was like late at night, you would like drink a glass of wine when you had energy. You
yeah.
would like drink a glass of wine and you just run. You would just go and run and run and run.
Yeah, I
Which
was all about drinking wine and running. I still love running so much.
but I mentioned that because I was reading about how meditation has become important to you, and I was thinking about running as a meditation, or about running as maybe the sort of earlier version of doing that kind of thing in a different way. But I wanted to ask you about meditation and just sort of how your meditation practice has been additive to your life, and also just sort of how it's influenced your songwriting practice as well.
It's changed everything in this way that when I had started meditating, it was purely out of necessity because my body felt like my body became Alcatraz. It was this inescapable thing. And like I said, total collapse of it came back to my digestive system first and foremost. And then everything from there just stopped working. Was having nerve issues, vision issues, hearing issues, all of this stuff. Just it was a domino effect. So when I got into meditation, it was because I was pushed off that cliff. I don't think if I didn't get to that point where my body and my life became so everything became so uncomfortable, I don't think I ever would have chosen to jump off that cliff of meditation. I had to be pushed.
Who introduced, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, how did it come into your life?
It came into my life, to be totally honest with you. There was one night that I was more, I guess more than one night, but a lot of it comes down to one night where I almost killed myself, and I had come closer than I ever had because everything felt like such a prison. So it was in that moment I knew either I have two options: either I kill myself, or I find another way to escape my body and transcend that situation. So luckily I chose option B, and I didn't know anything about meditation. I had heard people talk about it, but I didn't know how to get into it. So I had started off with guided YouTube meditations, and everything changed once I started sitting in stillness. It started with guided, and then I drifted into music meditations, listening to Daniel Lenoir or Brian Eno, Harold Budd, anything that could get me into that space. And then it started becoming this other thing where it was total stillness, total quiet, it was total opposite of everything that our world is today. And it was in that doing nothing that it became doing everything, and everything in my life became alive. Creativity and music changed in this way that I never saw coming. I wasn't even expecting that to evolve or have it wasn't even on my mind. I was just in survival. But what had happened was when I was working on music, my music started changing its face completely. And I was suddenly that's when I realized, oh, this is all coming back from the stillness, because it was my way of getting the fuck out of my own way and letting those inner creatures take whatever shape they need to take. And then in a lot of ways, I just started feeling like an observer.
And so how long ago was that, or sort of how long have you been doing your meditation practice?
I've been pretty religious about it for a little over 3 years.
Wow, cool. And is it like a once a day? Is it a twice a day? What's your
It's random times throughout the day. It's at least 1 hour a day at a time, but then often it ends up being way more than that. It'll be whenever if I have a free 10 or 15 minutes, I sit down and I go into that space. That's a huge reason why I named the album Rarely Do I Dream. Is it's a play off of that whole idea of what is a dream and what is reality. When I would spend all this time in that frequency, and everything would be quiet, and I would go into that beautiful void, that started feeling more and more like home. I mean, that there was something about that that completely eroded my fear of death because I felt like I could feel behind that curtain of what that is, and it was nothing but love and warmth and this amazing indescribable bubble of acceptance and wholeness. And the more that I spent time reaching behind that curtain, when I would come to and I would look around and be in this quote unquote reality, this started feeling like the dream, to the point where I'm now convinced a huge purpose and perspective of why we're here to begin with, having this earthly experience, is to wake up in the dream, to become aware in the dream.
Yeah, I mean, I have a meditation practice myself and I find it so beneficial. I mean, in so many ways, like what you're saying, I started doing it as well for anxiety and just sort of like as a coping mechanism. And then it really does plug you into a whole other plane of understanding.
Yeah, totally. It's crazy how that happens because you're so convinced, because our world is so full of distractions and there's always something to keep you busy. It's so easy to get sucked into it. And I don't blame anyone. There's addiction everywhere, and there's always something on Netflix. There's always something to keep you from that stillness. But it's the greatest life hack that no one can talk you into: stopping everything, sitting down, being in the stillness.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you found it. I'm glad you're still, I mean, even if this is just a dream, I'm glad you're still here in it with me.
Well, it's a dream, but it's the kind of dream that's such a necessity to learn the lessons that we need to learn and experience every feeling that we need to experience. That's another thing with difficulties in life and all these things that we wouldn't ever choose to go through, adversity and things that we feel like we'll never get through. Those emotions are the most valuable, treasured emotions, because it's only in those moments of adversity that's really going to turn you into who you need to be. If life is always this thing where everything goes your way, then you're when it's all said and done, you're not going to get much out of this thing.
Well, I think that is an apt place for us to end things.
Well, Jenny, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Safe travels out there on the road, and I hope I'll see you out from behind the screen sometime soon.
I hope so too. Thanks again, Jenny.
Thanks again to Trevor for connecting for that awesome conversation. And as I mentioned earlier, Youth Lagoon is currently on tour with dates in the US until mid-May, and details available at youthlagoontour.com. And that does bring us to the end of the episode. If you're still with me, I really appreciate that you listen to the whole thing. Tell a friend about the LSQ podcast. Send them to jennylsq.com, and you can also find the show on all the different platforms. You can reach me by email at lsqpod@gmail.com, and find me on Blue Sky and Instagram at jennylsq.